So there's 3 items I want to touch on: what is biochar and what it is not, how it's made, and what it's used for, and I hope this addresses some or most of the questions that you might have. If you're curious, there's a great YouTube video, this of El Dorado, which shows that biochar is not a new thing. It's actually hundreds and thousands of years old. And so I would encourage you to just look that up on YouTube or somewhere else. Secret of El Dorado. It's about biochar. What is biochar? There's a lot of different terms that are floating around depending on who you talk to. Char, biochar, black carbon, charcoal, activated carbon, biocarbon. They're not all the same, but some people use them synonymously. What is charcoal? Charcoal is biomass that is heated in the absence of oxygen. And it usually ends up being nearly 100% carbon, so just flat stuff. And this process is called pyrolysis. I use the term biochar for charcoal that is used as a soil amendment, so that I can put into the ground and that it has certain functions in the soil. It's a stable solid and can last there for thousands of years. So you can look at it as soil amendment, and you can think about it as a carbon sink as well. You can actually watch making biochar when you're sitting around a campfire. I'm not going through all the details. When you light a fire, there's a lot of different processes happening at the same time. If you have a hard time starting your campfire, it's usually because you have wet wood. And the stuff that comes off first, which is white, is usually just water vapor, steam. When things get a little hotter, you get some stinky, acidic smoke. That's when the biomass starts decomposing, and things speed up further. The color of the smoke changes, and you see a flame at some point. And what's coming off there and what's actually igniting are volatile compounds, oils and tars and particulate matter that actually ignite. So it's not the wood itself or the biomass itself. It's things that get cooked off the wood. At some point towards the end of the burning process, you're left with some glowing coals that are orange and yellow and not much of a flame anymore. That means that all the volatile compounds are gone, and you're just left with carbon and the oxygen that interacts with the carbon and the heat. That's what provides this glow. And you have the lower right, you have this little color chart that you can look at your glowing coals compared to these colors, and it gives you a rough estimate how hot, what the temperature actually is. This is in Celsius, so you can say you can see the lighter the color, the hotter things are. And yeah, at the end of the campfire, if everything went well, you're left with a handful of ash as the end product of a armload of more of firewood. So that means pretty much everything has combusted and burned up. What's left is just some ash and minerals. And this is a real nice example from Thomas Reed. You have the whole process in a little match. Okay, so at the bottom there, you have gasification happening. It's a very hot process. Some charcoal forming, pyrolysis just right above, and at the very top, the combustion. Again, on the right side, you have these different temperature ranges in a flame, in a matched flame. And all these different processes happen at the same time. And yeah, consecutively and at the same time in different parts of the biomass. Yeah, so the first step is drying, then the torrefaction. That's when start to cook off. And the hotter things get, the longer things take. You go from pyrolysis to gasification and then combustion. So, and then depending on at what temperature you operate, again, at the torrefaction is a lower temperature, gasification is a higher temperature. Your end product is different, or the composition of your end products. So if you want, so the black is solid, that's our char or charcoal. Purple is liquid. The gaseous form is green. So during torrefaction, you have only a little bit of gas, but a lot of char. Slow pyrolysis has about equal amounts of all these things. Fast pyrolysis produces more liquid, and gasification, hence the name, a lot of gas and very little solids and liquids. So depending on what your objective is, what your target product is, changing the temperature is one critical component. Maybe you've heard about carbon capture and storage, some newfangled technology to capture carbon emissions from power plants. But hey, we've had this for a long, long time. That's what trees do, right? That's what plants do. They capture the carbon from the atmosphere. And there's our little chemical process, carbon dioxide plus water, with the magic component chlorophyll, sun's energy, turns it into sugar and oxygen. What you see here is our regular, normal, everyday carbon cycle in vegetation and soils, right? You have photosynthesis, builds up plant matter, organic matter. Plants die, microbes do their thing, decompose the biomass, and carbon dioxide gets released. I'm not going into all the details of these cute little critters, but we can add another step. We're not going to put the microbes out of work completely, but if we add the pyrolysis step, we can actually capture a lot of this carbon, put some in the ground, and use part of it for energy, be it for heat, be it for power, be it as liquid transportation fuels. The 50%, what it says there, that's not quite right. I think the yield usually in biochar is more in the 20 to 30% range, but at least it's a different step in there when we add the biochar to extract char and carbon. Making gas from wood is not a new technology. World War II, a lot of cars in Germany ran on wood gas because oil was severely limited. So yeah, you can run vehicles on this wood gas, and some people make it as a outfit their modern rigs with it. You can still drive it. It's just the gas. This is a modern facility, a biogasification unit in North Carolina. That's the unit itself. It feeds the gas that comes off. Remember, we have these three components that come off this process. We have some gas, we have some liquids, we have some char. They run it through a off-the-shelf generator to make power. Put it on the line and sell the power. And some of the excess heat feeds a pond that's right next door, and they grow duckweed. Again, that's the biomass, and it goes back into the system. And then, I have
a quick question on those, Martin.
Yes.
On those systems, I've heard of some systems that have like you basically can dial down or dial up the temperature maybe to get more gas versus you want more char, solids coming out. Are these the pictures that you have the kind of systems that can do that?
No, this one is pretty much dialed in to produce as much gas as possible, because that's what they get the RIN and credits for, because they can sell it as renewable power, a renewable natural gas. So yeah, for them the liquid component is a nuisance. They try to get rid of it as much as possible. and there is not much market for the char component yet. So yeah, this is more targeted towards natural gas production.
Okay. So like biomass gasification. Kind of, okay.
Yes.
Great.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it has a co-product of char for every gas. And then you can find biochar, and lots of different things. I mean, there's some craft supplies on the left. There's a little crucible. What you use for grilling or your barbecue. That's char. That's charcoal, with very similar properties to our biochar. As I mentioned earlier, it's all char. It's all charcoal. But if I use it in the soil in this process, I call it biochar. And the char has different properties if I want to put it into the soil or use it for cooking in this case. I just recently moved down from Montana, but I think you have the similar things here. Just after some forest thinnings, forest treatments, you end up with stuff that can get used, that can get utilized, and you end up with flash piles. You light them, you burn it, you pollute the air, you burn a hole in the ground, and yeah, when you're done, hopefully, and it didn't run, you end up with a little pile of ash and move on. So, but I think part of one of the topics you're talking about is, well, what can we do with this material rather than just letting it go up in smoke? So making charcoal, that's the old-fashioned way. It used to be a profession, it used to be a trade, just making charcoal for smelting industries and such that needed this kind of material. And this is some hardwood, and you pile this material, almost like a little tent, a yurt. You have the stack in the middle for lighting it. Cover it up to eliminate and reduce the oxygen. Remember, if I just light it, it turns into ash because I have oxygen available. That's why I need to exclude the oxygen. And so that's what this brown sod is, to cover up the whole pile. And then you go up there, light it, and wait a few hours and days, and then take it apart and hopefully end up with some ash. If you had a leak somewhere and air got in, there won't be much left, then a little bit of ash. Then there's some DIY methods, some backyard productions. That's a little retort. In this inner cylinder, that's where the wood is. Again, it's sealed, airtight, except those few little holes on the very top, and then you start heating the whole barrel. Exeter retort is one system. It's a similar concept, just laying on its side. On the bottom left, you see what goes in. A few hours later, you open the door, and the volume hasn't changed much, but the weight will have changed significantly, and you're left with almost just pure carbon. They did the same thing with deer bones. That's what you see on the right. So pretty much any biomass, anything that contains solid carbon, can be made into char, biochar. This is a TPI steel kiln. It was developed for and in developing countries. It doesn't look like it's a much cleaner version to burn things than open pile burning. So it doesn't use any of the volatiles that are coming off. It just steams them off. The Nevada Department of Forestry has some of these units. They built them, and they use them to reduce their pinyon juniper forest restoration management. for encroachment, and then the smaller stuff and it seems to be working. So they're still trying to find a market for this, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. It's not easy. It's still a niche, but I think we're getting there slowly but surely. This is a modified organ kiln that I built or had built by a local high school up in Missoula, Montana. As you can see, the conditions weren't quite optimal to operate it, but I had only a weekend to test it. So I ended up doing it in snow, and it was cold and wet, but I still ended up with this in the lower right. You can see it, this little 2 cubic yards, 1.5 cubic yards of char at the end. Kontiki is a nicer, prettier version of it. Again, similar principle. The bottom is closed, the sides are closed. You put your material in it, and it burns from it. The flame on the top of the material excludes the oxygen from going further down. So that's how you keep building your char at the bottom. So great. Now you made some biochar. Now what? Or maybe I should stop here and see if there are questions. So I'm not just zipping through this.
And there's a couple of new folks who hopped on as well. I'm trying to make sure you're at least unmuted on my end.
Okay. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, then I'll keep going. So once you have the char, the char has different physical and chemical characteristics. Depending on what feedstock you use, depending on the moisture content, depending on how fast you heat it up to what temperature, all these different factors drive the end product or the quality of the end product. And this is just a list of different characteristics. I'm not going into the details, but pH value can be different. The surface area can be different. The volatile organic compound composition can be different. So depending on what you want to use it for, these are things you need to pay attention to, and that you can and should test. This is just a quick image on the left. On the y-axis, you see the char yield in percent, and on the x-axis at the bottom, on the left picture, you see the pyrolysis temperature, how hot it got, and you can see that the yield decreases the higher the temperature is, just because you're burning off more material. But again, it has different characteristics than the one that was made at a lower temperature. And then on the right one, you see, depending on how fast you heat it up, if it takes how many minutes it takes for a different temperature difference. This is just for different pH values. Again, at the bottom, you have the highest heating, the highest treatment temperature in Celsius, and then different materials. But you can see that the high, in general, you can say the higher the temperature was, the higher the pH value. And there's simple tests to do it. You don't have to have an entire lab to test for these things. There's some pretty simple things you can test. If it smells like a campfire, then there's still some volatiles in there, which, if you want to put it into the soil, are less desired. If you want to use it for barbecue, then yes, you want them in there, because although they're not healthy, that's what provides a nice flavor on your meat. If you touch it and it's oily, then the polyaromatic hydrocarbons are still in there. They're often not desired either. You can do an acute earthworm avoidance test. You have a shoebox with some soil, On one half, on the left half, you add biochar to it, and put the worms on the right side with it, just pure soil, and just see what happens. If they migrate in both halves, great, nothing's wrong. If they cluster on one end with the unamended soil, then probably something's wrong with your char, and you want to think again if you want to put that in your garden or in your field. Same thing with plants. You get some, I don't know, seeds for sprouting. Put them on there. If they don't sprout, maybe something's wrong. If they happily grow, then you probably have a good product. And the magic of char comes from its enormous surface area. 1 gram of activated carbon can have a surface area of between 3,000 and 22,000 square feet. Does anybody know what size the end zone is of a football field? It's about 4,800 square feet. So, yeah, 1 gram of this activated carbon can have as much surface area as the size of the end zone of a football field. I think it's pretty impressive. What are the advantages of biochar for the soil? Improved water holding capacity, increased soil aeration, enhanced nutrient dynamic, just because the microbes find a good living environment. And it holds on to nutrients and fertilizer, so you'll have less leaching after precipitation events. This is just an example for how different soil types, at the bottom axis you have different soil types, how the soil type affects water holding capacity. And if you add biochar, if you add char, water holding capacity in general increases, which, if you think about increasing droughts, climate change, less than ideal soil types, it can most likely be beneficial. And then for livestock, it's not permitted in the US yet. It's been done in Europe and Asia. There's still some debate here, but it does have beneficial effects just in terms of the intestinal systems for animals, for less emissions, methane emissions, less ammonia emissions from litter and manures. It just makes for healthier gut flora for them, and yeah. And there's has been a lot of misconception. Biochar itself is not a fertilizer, and I think that in the past that has caused some real problems, that people were sold biochar is that magic ingredient for enormous prices, and they put it in the ground, pure biochar, and the yield decreased, or their crops died, or their flowers didn't do so well, because char is just that. It's just carbon, and no plant can live off carbon alone. And it acts more like a sponge. And so if you put raw biochar into the ground, it acts like a sponge. It sucks up nutrients that are not available to plants anymore. So what you need to do, you need to prime it with some organic ingredients to load all this giant surface area with nutrients, which increases microbial activity, and then it actually has beneficial effects for your plants. On the other hand, if you have contaminated soils and you want to draw toxins out of the soil, yes, that's when you want to use char in its raw form, so all these surface areas can still absorb the toxins rather than release something. Making biochar is a complex process. I mentioned it before, depending on the feedstock, temperature, moisture content, cooking, temperature, duration, all these things you end up with a different product. And yeah, so if you have somebody who goes to the local store and buys the same bag of char every time, and the quality is inconsistent, it makes it really hard for them to yeah, make sure they get the same product. And there are no real standards, classification developed yet for biochar. A reliable income stream is still difficult. I know a lot of people are trying. But a lot remains to be done. And with this, I close my presentation and any questions.
Hey, Martin, this is Chris. Thank you for sharing all that. I've been looking at biochar about earthworm tests and seed tests, and some of the caveats, you know, it's not a fertilizer. So one of the things that I'm thinking biochar might be good for is an amendment for turf. And so some of the questions I would have on that, when biochar first came out, I'm going, well, that's just a really fine, a dense carbon. And it, just like you described, it's going to be robbing nitrogen, break itself down, you know, look for its, you know, in equilibrium. And so that was always kind of my worry about it. But if we use it for turf, well, you're going to be having to add nitrogen to turf anyway to have it successful. So, you know, it might just be a good way to be able to conserve water, use less water for growing a turf. And I think that you might be able to do some good research studies on that. Your thoughts on that? Is it something you'd have to incorporate into the soil before you even put seed or you know, turf down? Anything you've got to share on that?
Yes, I think it is a good idea. I mean, I have not found a case where biochar would be bad. I think in terms of application, how do I get it in the ground, on the ground? Depending on how you process it, I mean, the product that comes out of the kiln or the facility are chunks, right? So depending on what you need it for, you can break it down a little bit all the way to fine powder. Maybe for turf, you wanted to have it in, I don't know, a little bit, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter pieces in pellet form. You can do that. And then either before the sod goes down, or you just apply it on top. I mean, they have these what are they called, aerators, right? Where they poke holes into the sod, and if it got too densified, if there's moss in there, so you get the moss out, and then instead of using sand, or in addition to sand, you can use these 1, 2, 3 millimeter sized char particles. So yes, and then you have the increased water retention, nutrient retention, and healthiest soil in general. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think because a lot of times you already have a turf in place, so I hadn't thought of using the aerator for the stature that you're able to get it in there, and that'd be a great way to administer.
And depending on how the lawn or the turf is used, applying it on the surface, and then if people walk on it, if people run on it, it gets worked in, right? And the smaller particles will get washed into the soil matrix with irrigation, or precipitation events. So it'll work its way down without mechanical assistance over time.
You're saying the surface area is huge. I mean, just how much would you want to use per unit? You know, if we want to call it less than an acre, or per yard, we would use.
And and there's a lot of research out there, and scientists are hotly debating it. You have to find the balance between the cost, A, of the material, and B, of applying it, and what are the benefits. So, I mean, turf, grassroots, I don't know how deep they go, 5 inches, 6 inches, 10 inches, a foot.
Yeah. No more than that.
No, right. So, maybe with an inch per, or a ton per acre. I mean, there's some numbers out there already, but there's still a lot of research going on trying to come up with a good number, and a lot of it depends on your soil type as well, right? And if it's sandy soil, you need something different than if it's loam or clay. For clay, you'll actually need it for breaking up the compact structure and for some airspace.
Yeah, I'm thinking of clay and alkaline soils, situations like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's hard for me to give a good number there, but there's research out there, and there's papers out there that can go in that direction. I know that UC Davis, the university, they have a big database for different types of char for different applications as well.
Okay. And you mentioned issues with standardization. You're going to be getting if we wanted to run some trials, say down one of our experiment farms,
yes.
Where would be a place we could commit it to getting standard developed? They're going out of
They're hammering by your room now, Martin.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, can you repeat that question, please? Sorry.
About just assuring that standardization of that if we wanted to make our own biochar, we really wouldn't know if we've got it in a standard form.
Right. So then that's where these simple methods with earthworm avoidance, just what does it smell like? What does it feel like? Is it shiny? Does it almost sound like glass when you drop it? Or is it more a dull sound? Is it more a dull look? You can learn a lot about the quality. You won't get all the chemistry out of that, but it gets you in a ballpark where you can say, yeah, it's good for us or not so good for our soil. So I would sample. I mean, every time you make some, and if you can keep the input parameters fairly consistent, so if you have the same feedstock, similar size, similar moisture content, you cook it at the same temperature for the same time, you should have fairly consistent results. And then I would just take a sample of each batch and run it through some simple tests. I mean, you can get pH strips in the drugstore. So there's a lot of these things that you can just you can do that at home in your kitchen without killing yourself.
Well, sorry everybody else for just taking Martin there for a little bit. Let him go now and let people ask some questions.
And I wanted to let me hop in and say I saw that Karuna hopped on and has been listening in as well, and Harry Groot, and I'm not sure that you have audio to speak with us, Harry, but hopefully you can hear. Karuna, you just want to say who you are and where you're at real quick, and if you have any questions from what you heard.
I'm Karuna from the Salmon River Restoration Council. and Western Klamath Restoration Partnership. And I'm just, curious. It's definitely something we're always looking for. How are we going to get this biomass out of the woods in some way that is going to be beneficial? So I'm just, very interested to see what other people are doing.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that soil turf amendment, where we've got our arid places, we want to conserve water on our turf. That could, if it worked, we could have a good amendment.
And then, Harry, just so you know, if you have a question or you want to speak, I think there's a PIN number you have to stick in. So I apologize if you're trying to get on and all. Any other questions for Martin? I'm sure a few of you have some other questions or comments.
And I'm happy to answer emails. So if you want to get a hold of me offline to answer further questions. I know it's a very complex topic. It's where the markets are right now. It doesn't lend itself yet to using vast amounts of biomass that we have sitting in our woods. So I think it's one component. But it's not the. I think you mentioned that in your agenda there. It's not the silver bullet, but I think it can play a role. And as markets become more aware of it, we just did a market study, small scale, here in California, and I was calling composters and building shops and landscapers that, hey, do you know biochar? And nobody knew about it. So I think if over time, when people start learning about it and what it is and what it's not, I think has a market value than a dollar value. I think it becomes a more valuable product.
Do you know how those processes are going as far as the standards and approvals for use of biochar for different things? I was surprised to see that you said in the U.S. that it's not approved for livestock yet, because I actually have somebody that I know of who's been making, that was like their market for a fairly large biochar operation that they're doing is into the feedstock market. So I was kind of surprised to hear that that's not really an officially approved process, and if that means
right, and that's the FDA. I think it's the FDA who's still. So the problem is that because it's an adsorbent, right? It can adsorb with a D as in door, because things sit on the surface. Because it's so good at extracting toxins or pretty much anything, the FDA says, okay, you have your organic beef, but you can pretty much feed that animal medications and non-organic approved things over its lifetime, and then for the last 3 months you feed it. We have a co-feed of biochar, and all that stuff gets pulled out and it gets marketed as organic, even though it wasn't raised organic. I think that's the main argument. Right now, what's holding it back in the U.S.
So they're not necessarily saying that you can't use biochar in feed. They're saying that it can't be organic meat if it's finished on biochar or with biochar.
Yes, okay. But it's hard to tell who's using char and who's not using char. So, and that's the challenge, and my understanding, that's why it's not I don't think legal is the right term, but here yet, yes.
So maybe it sounds like I'm gonna have to look into that more. Follow up with my person who's doing that here. Thanks.
Yes.
We have time for maybe one more question. Well, that was really great information. I know it was really great for me to see all the different, some of the different styles of facilities for pyrolysis, and well, just the simple things as well, because I've heard about a lot of different ones, and just seeing the pictures even for me was really helpful. So I appreciate you sharing this with us, Martin. And,
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it's really something you can do in your backyard. It's a little bit art, it's a little bit science. I mean, the one kiln I showed that I had made and then operated, that was my first time ever. And yeah, you try it, you learn it, and you need to know what you're looking for, and you end up with a finished product. Or yeah, so it's a nice experience.
great. And I apologize for not even having the time on me for our next call, but it's 2 months from now on the 3rd Thursday, I believe, whatever Thursday we're on of the month. So in January, we'll do another call. And is there anything specific that any people would like to cover? If there is, you can always get a hold of me or unmute and let us know now, Ann and I. And I'll work with Emily to make sure that this recording can get cut down to the biochar piece and posted for everybody. And I just want to encourage thank you all for being on, and encourage everyone to try to use either in the wood utilization space or in the main FACT network space, and on your local networks if you're in the state network, or in Washington and you're on a social networking space with other fire adapted communities folks, to just talk about what you're doing in terms of wood utilization, because I think the more ideas we can get out there and the more we can do to work on bringing our costs down, the better it's going to be all around for our work, so and for our environment. So thank you all for your time. And any closing thoughts from anybody else?
This is John from Utah, and I apologize for not getting on some of the other calls. Just now getting a little room in the schedule, but just kudos to Martin. I've seen several biochar presentations, but that was pretty concise and very informative. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and I have
thank
you have more information if you need to.
Yeah.
And John, I'll tell you, I was sharing your wood chip wattle ideas with the folks around here coming off of some of our fires this summer. So I just thought that was great, and was sharing that blog post with folks. And I don't know that anything happened with it yet, but
it's still a tool, I guess. So thank you.
definitely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time, and hope you all have great Thanksgiving weeks and Thanksgiving next week.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right. And Emily, I will send this to you later.